Sam I am, that Sam I am. I do not like that Sam I am. Would you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham. A while back, I tweeted a speech Ashton Kutcher gave. It was one of those speeches that celebrities give at award shows, one of those speeches about the values of hard work. And 8 White Castle restaurants a year. I quite like their little burgers. Now, you're probably wondering what a fast food chain, Mila Kunis's husband from that 70s show, and a Dr. Seuss book all have to do in common. Maybe they were quotes that were brought up on Saturday Night Live, or candidates from Tonight shows like Jimmy Fallon or James Corden. Although that would be funny, unfortunately, that's not the case. These were all brought up on the Senate floor by none other than former presidential candidate and Republican senator from Texas, Ted Cruz. But what business did Ted Cruz have in bringing up these weird, and as I'm sure you can admit, quite immature topics on the floor of one of the oldest and most respected democratic institutions in the world? What Ted Cruz was doing was debating the continued funding of Obamacare, Barack Obama's single-payer alternative to healthcare. In his noticeably theatrical tactics, Ted Cruz spoke on the Senate floor for 21 hours, only being able to take breaks when his fellow senators agreed to ask him extensive questions. What Ted Cruz was doing this debate is what we call the filibuster, the weird rule that seems to have broken our Senate. Now, as I'm sure you would all agree, the easiest way to get something passed in a group or to reach to a consensus is through a simple majority, meaning that when the majority in a group decides that they want something and it outweighs the minority, that's what the group tends to go with. If we put this into perspective, say you're going out to eat with your friends, 3 want to go to Mondo's and 2 want to go to In the Raw. You'd end up going to Mondo's because, as most people say, majority rules. But that's not how voting seems to work in the Senate. There are 100 delegates in the Senate, 2 from each state. But before a bill, motion, or act is voted on through a simple majority, senators must first debate the topic at hand. Not only that, but senators must vote to end the debate about the topic. And this vote can't be ended with a simple majority. Instead, it's ended with a 60-vote supermajority. I'm sure you could see where this could cause problems, because no senator that disagrees with a bill is going to vote for the debate to end and for voting to be able to continue. The process of ending this debate and continuing with the vote is called cloture. And the actual process of prolonging the debate so the vote can't happen is what we like to call the filibuster. To truly understand the technicalities of the filibuster, we must understand the history behind it. The filibuster first showed up in America in the early 1800s. As I'm sure you all remember from the musical and the song The Election of 1800, Aaron Burr was vice president and Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States. Aaron Burr being vice president meant that he was the president of the Senate, and therefore he could change the rules. At the time, there was something in place in the Senate called the previous question motion. The previous question motion made it to where debate could end at any time senators wanted, and they could go straight into a simple majority vote. But Aaron Burr, being the intellectual that he is, decided that senators should be able to debate for as long as they wanted. So Aaron Burr changed the rules in the Senate and made it to where senators could debate until they were physically too tired to continue. And these were the rules for the filibuster until the early 1900s. As I'm sure you're all aware from your US or world history classes, in the early 1900s, World War I was plaguing not only Europe, but the rest of the world. At the time, the United States had deemed itself a neutral entity in the war, meaning that they weren't allied with any sides or they hadn't gone into any battles. But Germany, being the offensive country that they were, decided that they were going to align U-boats or massive submarines across the western coast of Europe. This means that commercial trade vessels that were coming from the United States into Europe were going to be met with weaponized submarines from Germany. Because of this, President Woodrow Wilson decided that these commercial trade vessels carrying products over to Europe should be armed with weapons. But many senators and people just from the opposing party disagreed with President Woodrow Wilson. They said that this would be the line between war and peace and would eventually throw the United States into a war that they weren't ready to fight. Whenever the motion that President Woodrow Wilson fought so valiantly for finally reached the Senate floor, it had only 3 days left until its expiration date. What the senators who disagreed with President Woodrow Wilson decided to do was debate the motion for 3 days straight. 3 days of debating without being able to sit and only being able to drink milk or water and not being able to eat. They did this successfully. They filibustered for 3 days on end until the motion expired. President Woodrow Wilson was so visibly mad that he went on a stroll through a park and, according to his wife, went to an art gallery and stared at one specific painting for hours on end. But that's besides the point. Whenever the next legislative assembly came into session, President Woodrow Wilson decided that he would make the senators change the rules. This is where cloture comes in. They compromised that a 67-vote supermajority could stop unlimited debate and could forward a vote. As you can see, that's not a good compromise. 67 votes in a supermajority means that 2/3 of the Senate would basically have to agree with something that's being passed. If we put that into perspective, let's say with a kindergarten class of 33 students, 17 out of the 33 students want to watch a movie, and the other 16 decide that they want to do some other activity that they're unsure of. With a simple majority principle, the 17 students would be in favor and the class would watch the movie. But with the Senate majority rule at the time, they need 67% of the votes. So 23 of the kindergarten students would have to vote in favor of the movie. And because the debate would never end, because the kindergartners who were on one side would probably never change their mind, they would essentially be stuck in debate forever, and nothing would happen, no activity would go into place, which is a lot of what we see in the Senate today. Next on our stop through time is 1957. In 1957, a Civil Rights Act of the same year finally reached the Senate floor. As I'm sure you're all aware, Southerners at the time weren't too fond of civil rights legislation. Senator Strom Thurmond from South Carolina, a Democrat, decided that he was going to do everything in his power to stop this civil rights legislation from being passed. So, Senator Strom Thurmond filibustered in the longest filibuster of all time, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 for 24 hours on end. At one point, Senator Strom Thurmond literally had one foot on the chamber floor, his other foot outside, as he peed from one side of the Senate to the side of the outside with his fellow senator friend holding a bucket for him. Senator Mike Mansfield, who was the majority leader at the time, thought that this was immature. He thought that it would, frankly, stupid for the Senate to not be able to multitask. So what Senator Mike Mansfield did was change the rules. What Senator Mike Mansfield wanted was the Senate, again, to be able to multitask. So he made it to where the filibusters didn't require any talking at all. Instead, senators could simply threaten the filibuster, say that they were going to do this, or say that they were going to prolong debate forever, and debate would continue, no vote would ever happen, and a bill would stay in limbo. And last on our stop through time is 1975, where the votes required to end the filibuster changed from 67 to 60, which doesn't make much of a difference. That takes us to today, 2022. As I'm sure you're all aware, there's a 50-50 tie in the Senate. 48 Democrats, 2 left-leaning independents who caucus with the Democrats, and 50 Republicans. And Kamala Harris, as the president of the Senate, it would be the most obvious thing that she'd be on the Senate floor most of the times breaking the ties. But this never seems to happen because of the filibuster. Let's say if the Democrats wanted to pass an extensive infrastructure deal, then they'd have to convince 10 Republican senators to vote to end the debate and therefore be able to vote on the bill. And as I'm sure you're all aware, the Senate is extremely partisan, and that would most likely never happen. And that isn't the only reason that the Senate is gridlocked. Because, like I said, there are 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. The votes of any moderate senators matter a lot, such as Democratic Senators Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who seem to make an appearance on NBC, MSNBC, or CNN every day. And on the other hand, Republican senators like Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins, who sometimes vote with the other side and just recently voted to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson and voted to convict Donald Trump. But, as most people are unaware of, there is a way to end the filibuster. This is what has been called the nuclear option. a last case, breaking case of emergency resort that means that the majority party could technically end the filibuster at any time they wanted, because seemingly nothing in the Senate can be passed without a supermajority except a change in rules. But you're probably wondering, why don't the Democrats take away the filibuster and basically let them do whatever they want? Democrats are extremely wary of the fact that if they get rid of the filibuster, when Republicans ultimately come into power, they also won't have the filibuster, and they'll do anything they can or anything they want and reverse any decisions that they make. And that's why you see senators like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin on the news saying, I won't eliminate the filibuster and I won't go nuclear. So whether the Senate goes nuclear or not, and whether the filibuster's gotten rid of, the next time that you hear about the filibuster from maybe social media, your government teacher, or MSNBC, Fox News, or CNN, think about the way that it impacts how voting works in the Senate, and whether it's your cup of tea, or maybe a load of bologna, or, as Ted Cruz would put it, green eggs and ham. Thank you.